My name is André Eriksen. I'm the CEO and founder of Asetek. Today we are going to talk a little bit about why Asetek is entering this space in the first place. We are going to talk a little bit about the products we are going to offer you guys eventually, and also talk a little bit about our pedals. Actually talk a lot about our pedals. I've been involved in racing myself for more or less all my life. When I was a teenager, I did motocross myself for several years. Then I was out of it for a number of years because I was building Asetek. And in 2007, my family and I moved to California to start up our US office. And a good friend over there introduced me to go-karts. So I started to race go-karts at Sonoma Raceway. And I did that for a number of years. Both my kids, Sophie and Valdemar, were racing go-karts. On top of that, I moved into Formula cars, something called Pro Formula Master. I would say for almost 10 years, we spent more or less every weekend on the racetrack. After we moved back to Denmark in 2014, I continued doing a little bit of go-kart. My son continued through the Formula ranks, did Formula 4, Formula 3. So we are still, let's say, heavily involved in racing, as you can also see behind me here. I built my own first simulator, also in California in 2007. For my son Valdemar, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I built a Formula 3 simulator. It was based on Højsindkval pedals, it was based on Leo Bodnar steering, and for the top, we used, or the monocoque if you want, we used Daniel Kvyat's, the Formula 1 driver, his former Formula Renault chassis. I also, just out of interest, know a little bit about the simulators. I built a few myself, but I never really saw simulators as a business area for Asetek for many reasons. One of them is that it's a little bit far away from liquid cooling, at least at the first impression. Secondly, sometimes it can be dangerous to mix pleasure and business. But a couple of years back, we founded something we call the Asetek SimSports Academy. It's essentially a big room where we have, I think, 15 Alienware PCs, obviously Alienware PCs with Asetek liquid cooling inside. And we made this academy so the young people in the region we live here in Denmark, they can come actually for free and practice esports and game and have fun. And as a part of that, we also bought and installed 6 driving simulators. What we learned was that it was actually pretty difficult to keep these simulators running. There was driver issues, there was firmware issues, there was quality issues, steering wheel not working, pedals not working, broken seat, broken frame. There was a lot of problems keeping these simulators alive. And then one day I looked at it, let's say more with a business perspective and say, you know what, I think with the knowledge we have about racing and I think with the knowledge we have about mechatronics, I think we can do this better. And then we started to look into it, and that was actually, let's say, early beginning of Asetek SimSports adventure. We are roughly 12 months back maximum. Since then, it has gone fast. We have acquired a company, we have acquired some assets and IP, and as you can see right here, we actually have our first pre-production sample of our pedals ready that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about. As we come from the racing, real racing side of things, our SimSports products are going to reflect that. What we are trying to build are products that will feel like the real thing. We will be building products that can handle some abuse. And for customers who are more in the field of an arcade or gaming-like feeling, I think there will be better and other vendors than Asetek. What I've brought here is actually a generic pedal box from a real race car. It could fit into any race car, for example, a Formula 4 or something like that. And then we have here a brake disc and a brake caliber from a real race car also. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes to talk to you about how this stuff actually works. So To no big surprise, I assume, here we have the throttle, here we have the brake pedal, and here we have the clutch. First thing you notice is that the brake pedals are actually in a straight angle relative to the floor. That's because when you brake, and you brake really hard, you know, real race car drivers often brake between 100 and 200 bars. You get the absolute best and most efficient braking when you hit the pedal 90 degrees. What you can also tell from these pedals, perhaps, is that you have the brake pedal most forward. So why is that? That's because if you have a tough moment and you're almost losing the car, the first pedal you want to touch is not really the throttle or the clutch, it's the brake pedal. So therefore we typically have the brake pedal a little bit more forward. As this is for a real race car, you can see there are 2 brake cylinders here. The reason for that is you have front brakes, you have rear brakes, and then by turning this, you can adjust the brake bias. We don't really need that in a simulator, partly because you don't have front and rear brakes, and the bias you can do in the software. The way it works is that we pour in brake fluid in these reservoirs into the cylinders. Then as you can see here, we have a stainless steel braided brake tube. Then we here have a brake caliber, we have the brake pads, and we have the brake disc. So as you can see, this is heavy duty stuff. And that brings me to the next, I don't know if I should call it misunderstanding, but a brake pedal needs to be hard. You don't want a brake pedal that feels like this. Again, this is for gaming or for arcade mode. For real racing, you want a hard brake pedal. The harder, the better almost. Obviously, the brake pedals are not touching the disc at all times, because if it was, it would be dragging, you would be losing a lot of speed, and you would burn up your brake pads. So the way a caliber like this works is when you press the brake pedal, you move the fluid, which will then compress the pistons, which again will make the brake pads touch the disc. And as soon as you let go of the throttle, the brake disc will retract itself a little bit. It's not like a millimeter, it's more like a 1/10 of a millimeter, so the brake disc again will spin freely. This is really how it works in a real race car. The fluid you use is kind of an aggressive fluid. Personally, I don't really like to see people use that for a simulator at home, because this is not what you want your kid to be drinking, or your dog or your cat. And I'm sure if I got something like this on the carpet at home, my wife would not be really happy with me. But you need to do it in a real race car because you need a fluid with a high boiling point. Needless to say, as you can see, this brake caliber is actually golden. This gets really hot. So because of that, you want a brake fluid that can handle the temperature, but for SimSports, we don't really need that. Furthermore, as you can see here, there is actually a reservoir here where you can pour in the brake fluid. That's because in a race car, every time you go on track, you bleed the brakes, so that if you have just small air bubbles in the system, you can get rid of them. Why do you want to get rid of bubbles? Well, that's because if you have bubbles in the brake system, number one, it's not very efficient because air can be compressed, the fluid cannot. And secondly, the brake pedal will be soft and you will have an unhappy race driver. So you really want air out. In a closed loop system, as in a home simulator or in a simulator, you also don't really need this reservoir. You also don't really need the brake lines. This is how it works in a real race car, and that was the purpose of this little session. So what we see here is the front wheel of this Audi R8 race car. You can see the brake discs here and the brake calibers. This is really high quality stuff. If I shut up just a second and spin the wheel, you can actually hear that the brake discs are just barely dragging. So I think that's audible. My point from when I explained how it worked before is that when you push the brake, the pads will squeeze the brake disc. That's how you stop. And when you let go of the pedal, they will just barely release themselves from the disc, which means that when you push the pedal again, there's really not a lot of travel. It's like almost hitting a wall, and that's how you want it, and that's how you are able to control your brake, especially your trail brake. As a car like this, you have a pretty advanced ABS system. But for example, in a Formula car, when you approach a corner, you come really fast because you have wings on the car. There's a lot of downforce. The car is compressed when you come down the straight. When you push the pedal really hard, just the moment you touch, You have a lot of grip because of the downforce, but as soon as you get, let's say, wind off the wings, the downforce goes away, and therefore you cannot brake as hard as you just did, because then you will log up the front wheels. So that's efficient braking is really about hitting the brake really hard and then letting go soft. And you can only do that if you have a hard brake pedal. So in front of me here, I have Asetek's first product going into the simulator market. It's our Invicta pedals, which will be our high-end series of pedals. The first thing you will see is that you can see the clutch pedal is separated from the brake and the throttle. The reason for that, of course, is that, for example, in a lot of Formula cars, for example, like in the GT3 car behind me, you don't really need a clutch. So the user can buy with or without clutch. It's 2 simple screws, you click them together and attach it. The next thing you will see is that it's basically an all metal construction. It's all aluminum and steel, no plastic parts whatsoever. All the adjustments, everything is aluminum. And the reason for that, of course, is that, as I said earlier, we want the pedals to be able to take the same amount of beating as you would see in a real race car. That's the whole plan. We have a heel rest. We have LED lights that you can configure. Of course, you don't have LED lights in a real race car, but since this is a gaming product, we thought it would look cool with some LED lights. As on the real car pedals, you have 90 degrees more or less between the pedal base and the pedal plates. You can move around the pedal plates in all kind of directions. These pedal plates right here are made for use with shoes or racing shoes. The design is actually inspired by a classic Ferrari F430 that I personally like a lot. I think it's one of Ferrari's big classics, so we took some inspiration from that. We do realize that if you are wearing socks and you are just a casual racer doing it for fun also from time to time, we will actually have other pedal plates available that are, let's say, more friendly without shoes. So if you're just wearing socks or something like that, you will not have these, let's call it sharp edges and things that you see here. But this is really to provide a good grip when you're wearing race boots. If we turn it to the side here, you can see all aluminum pedal arms. We have bearings, ball bearings in each pedal arm, so there's only a very little amount of play in it. We have a clutch with a real bite point, like in a real car. We have not over-engineered neither the clutch or the throttle, because in a race car, this is simple stuff. It needs to work, but there's no point in making hydraulic clutches or hydraulic throttles. You can adjust the hardness of the spring. You can put in a harder spring if you want, so you can get the throttle feel that you desire. You can adjust the pedal position on these finger screws, as well as the travel of the brake or the throttle if you want a short. You cannot really adjust them to a 45-degree leaned angle. These are made like in a real race car. If we look a little bit on our brake cylinder, here you have the brake cylinder itself, the pressure sensor. We have this little bell here. The idea here is that you can take this apart, and then in here we have a polymer. We have them in different hardnesses. Right here it's the white one. They will come in a black and a green version, but they will all be hard. And when I say hard, I think the black one, which will be the softest, is still soft for a race car driver. But they are not like chewing gum, let's put it like that. When I showed you the brake disc and the caliber before, I think it's needless to say that it's made of steel, it's made of aluminum. This stuff doesn't really flex. So when you press a brake pedal in a real race car really hard, it will travel a few millimeters and then it will be a full stop. And that's the same as we implemented here. When this orange disc touches this bell, then it's full stop. Then it can simply not travel anymore. And that's by design. Also because you don't want to over-exercise the polymer in here. Then it will wear out really fast. And as you may remember before, we want the pedals to handle at least 1 million activations. One thing you can do though, that I think is a pretty cool feature, is you can simulate the distance between the brake discs and the brake pads. So as you can see here, the brake pedal is really soft before it then turns hard. If I want a smaller travel, then I tighten this. Now there's no travel, now it gets hard right away. So that's user configurable. And then there's a thread in this one as well. So you just screw this towards the other one and now it's locked. So then you can get exactly the brake feel that you want and the brake feel that you like. As you can see here, we have a small plastic cover. We have the PCB for the pedal set in here. And as you will note, we have attached the USB cable on the front. These pedals are heavy duty. They are made for hard pressure. So of course you really need to bolt them to your rig or to your floor. If you just put them like this on your floor and you brake, they will skate across the floor. So they are really made for hard mounting. A little bit more theory actually about braking. When you want to trail brake, for example, that is, you brake really hard and you get slow off the pedal. If you imagine your brake pedal is like the throttle here, it's just soft. We have something called muscle memory. If I press this really hard and I trail off, I can replicate that with my muscles very easily. But if the brake pedal was soft, like it is on some sim pedals actually, if it's soft with a lot of travel, then you don't use your muscle memory. Then you have to use the memory of where your foot was positioned. And that's very difficult to do. So that's another reason why you really want a hard brake pedal. So getting a real race car feel in a set of sim pedals is really a lot about the brake. The throttle and the clutch is so-so, but having the right brake feeling is essential. As I talked to you about before, there are a lot of things in a real race car system that you don't need in a simulator. So if we start here with our newest and brand new brake cylinder, T.H.O.R.P. it's called. It says twin hydraulic opposite rapid pistons. That's why we call it T.H.O.R.P. But what it really is a brake cylinder made just for SimSports. As you can see, there are no tubes, there are no lid or caps where you can lose the fluid. Pretty much like our liquid cooling. It's sealed from our factory and it has an oil inside. This oil cannot handle high temperatures, so you don't really have high temperatures in your living room, at least not that you will damage the oil. So this product should actually work directly from us and you never need to worry about it. The way it works is just like the brake cylinder from the real race car pedals and just like the pistons in the brake caliber, they can move. So if I press this, you will see this one goes in and this one is from the brake pedal. I'll show you in a second on our pedals. But you can see this is how it works. So like in a real car basically, but the difference is everything is combined here in one sealed unit. Then we have a pressure sensor on top, again like in a real race car. And the way we test this, we'll show you in a second how we test here at Asetek. But the idea is that this should be able to withstand up to 200 bars of pressure. We design it for 1 million activations. So you would be a pretty hardcore braker to wear this part out. If we look a little bit on the software side, we have this RaceHub software that we developed. As you can see on the left, we have steering wheel, we have wheelbase, we have gear shifts, we have displays, we have handbrakes, we have motion. That shows you a little bit about our plans here at Asetek SimSports. We want to be let's say a full provider of everything. So the pedals are really just the beginning. Now that I actually push the pedal on the real pedals, you'll be able to see it in our software. One thing that is, I think, a really good feature for SimSports users that is not really needed in the real life, or it shouldn't be needed in the real life, is that we have dead zones in the top and we have dead zones in the bottom. So what is a dead zone? If we look at the throttle here, instead of squeezing the throttle really hard at all times, if you are doing a long race, you can put in a dead zone and then it's actually easier to reach 100. And if you have the bad habit, which you shouldn't have really, but if you have the bad habit of resting your foot on the brake pedal, you can take this out. Here now I've applied 8% dead zone, and as you can see in the bottom of the screen that I'm actually pushing the pedal, but if you look at the percentage, I'm not really applying brake, so that means that you can actually rest your foot on it if you want to. As you can see, it's measured in percentage. That's because the game reads your throttle in percentage. But if you calibrate, you can see now we are measuring in bars. When I do it with my foot or with my hand here, you can see now I'm reaching 17 bars. So why is that? Well, that's because we want to do it as in a real race car. So let's say that you are a Formula 4 driver, and in your real race car, your race engineer tells you to brake 100 bars. Then you go back now in your simulator and you want to practice the real deal. But how do you then know if you apply the right pressure or not? Well, that's easy, because in our system here, you now hold down your foot until you reaches 100 bar. Then you say complete. And then over here now, the 100% would actually equal 100 bars. So this can really be used as a very intelligent training tool. So if we look at the pedal maps, another thing we did, you can enable it or not, of course, is we have made programmable maps both for the clutch, the brake, and the throttle. So what is that? If we look at GT3 race car next to me, it has probably a 600 horsepower V10 engine. And if you press the throttle 50%, for example, in the rain, you don't really want the butterfly or the intake at the car to be at 50%. So you can program your own curves here, just as an example, that when here you move the brake pedal, so let's say now it's 50% and you can see it's a linear curve, and say, okay, I want a more or less aggressive. So now you can see, now I actually need to press the pedal 70% to be at 60% butterfly opening in the engine. And that's something we can do both on the brake and the throttle maps. That's a really nice and really useful feature. And I can tell you that in a real race car, the throttle mapping that I just showed you, or the example, is real. It's really rare that you have a linear relation between throttle position and the butterfly opening in the car. Another cool feature, literally, is the LED display, the LED bar in the pedals here. It's RGB, so if you want it purple, you get it purple. If you want it green, you want it green. And if you're a real hardcore racer and say, I don't want LED, no problem, then we just turn the LED off. Or perhaps a more likely example, your girlfriend is trying to sleep in the room where you have your simulator, so that now you can turn off the LED. Because we come from the liquid cooling space, quality and reliability is super important. I think you can easily imagine that if we sell a liquid cooler to Alienware and the fluid comes out, it may ruin your hardware and your computer, but it will also give Dell a quality problem. They may need to send back the entire PC, etc. So therefore, selling to the OEMs, quality and reliability is really a key thing. And that's what we have focused a lot on, and we will be focusing a lot on with our products. We don't want to see our products more than once, and that's when we say goodbye to them. One of the ways we do that is if we look at, for example, the pedal arm design here. I have to say that I think it looks really cool and really nice, but it actually did not look exactly like this from the beginning. The opening up here was actually larger, and we did a lot of finite element analysis. We did a lot of testing. We'll show you our test rig in a second. So we don't just construct our stuff and go into production. We actually test it, and we test it, and we test it. Our pedal arms, for example, have been tested millions of times already. And as you can see, this one here actually comes from, I don't remember if it was 116,000 activations before it gave in, with 200 bars of pressure. of course we don't want you to experience a brake arm like this. So therefore we change our designs until they are able to withstand what we want them to withstand. And that's how we ended up with this unique design that we have right here. So as I explained to you before, we have this opposite moving pistons here. So I removed the polymer, and as you can see now, when I press the brake pedal, that piston will retract itself into the housing. So just before mounting the polymer, I just wanted to show you that how you can limit the amount of travel and get this ultra hard feeling of a real race car by adjusting this. As you can see, if I adjust it like this, this is now the maximum pressure, or the maximum travel rather, than I can ever get. And if we remove this again, so the outer finger nut is just for locking, so this one will not slide around while you're driving, but you can do all your adjustments without this. So now I have a fair amount of preload. You can see the brake pedal is hard. If I want to replicate the feeling of having some air or some space between the brake pad and the brake disc, I can loosen this a couple of revolutions, and now you'll see I get this space between the brake piston or the brake disc and the pad. So it's very true to a real race car feeling. I can tell you my son in his GT3 car would love, or does love, when the brake pedal feels like this. This is how you want it. What we have here is our pedal test stand, and as you can hear, it's a little bit noisy. It's because we have pneumatic air cylinders that we use for actually pushing the pedals like they would be pushed in real life. So for example, right here we have the throttle pedal being activated over and over again, and we're doing that to see if we can wear out some of the parts or how they wear, and if we need to reinforce them, if we need to change the design, or also just to get a better understanding of the quality we are doing. Over here we have the brake pedal. As you can see, there's actually a shoe mounted, or the top of a shoe mounted on the piston, and from where I can see here, the shoe is actually pretty worn. So if you wonder about how many activations is a million, well, that's more than your race shoe will ever be up for, I can tell you that much. So if this was a shoe test, we ruined the shoe by now. If you look at the brake pedal here and our brake cylinder, it's actually the pressure transducer is connected to a data logging system. And if right now we are pushing with 90 bars. 90 bars is a pretty hard brake pressure for a race car driver. You can also, some drivers are pushing even harder. It's car dependent. But for this specific test, we are pushing 90 bars. And as we speak right now, I think the brake cylinder has done 500,000 activations with 90 bars. If you then think to yourself, is that a lot or is it not a lot? Well, if you consider a racetrack with 15 corners and you have, let's say, 2 or 3 straightaways, that means that on every lap you do, you brake hard 3 places. And then in the other places you only perhaps brake 30 bars or 40 bars. So 500,000 activations with almost 100 bars is actually quite stressful for the system, and it's pretty hard load. So what we have here is actually for a future product. It's for our wheelbase. As you can see, it's rotating back and forth. That's because we are trying to wear out this specific part and see for how many revolutions will it actually be able to live. And you can see now on the display here, it's actually rotated almost 3.5 million times, meaning that it has actually, if it was a steering wheel, passed the sensor 7 million times. It's the electronic integrity we are trying to determine here. So this is just one example of the rigorous testing we are doing on all our products.